The Martian dust storm had finally settled, revealing the impossible. Dr. Sarah Chen stood at the edge of the excavation site, her breath fogging the inside of her helmet as she stared at what shouldn't exist. The object, a sword-like artifact that seemed to drink in both shadow and light, hovered motionless in its crystalline chamber, untouched for what carbon dating suggested was over 1 million years. "The Council of Worlds demands another update," growled Ambassador Crix, his crystalline form refracting the harsh Martian sunlight. "Your Earth governments may have jurisdiction over this sector, but this discovery belongs to all sentient species." Sarah nodded absently, her attention fixed on the subtle patterns that seemed to shift across the artifact's surface. After 15 years of studying xenoarchaeology, she'd thought nothing could surprise her anymore. She'd been wrong. "The Arcturus Science Division has sent their finest minds," Crix continued, his tone carrying the particular blend of condescension that most alien species reserved for humans. "They believe the energy signatures match descriptions of the predecessor artifacts mentioned in." "It's not predecessor tech," Sarah interrupted, earning a sharp crystalline chime of disapproval from Crix. "The patterns are all wrong. This is something else entirely." The excavation site had become a circus over the past week. Representatives from every major spacefaring civilization had arrived, each claiming some ancestral right to study the artifact. The sword, if it could be called that, defied every attempt at analysis. Energy scans dispersed in impossible patterns. Quantum readings suggested it both existed and didn't exist simultaneously. Dr. Chen called out Dr. Yuli Patel, her research partner, rushing across the red Martian soil with a tablet in hand. "The latest resonance scans just came in. You need to see this." Sarah turned away from the artifact, grateful for the interruption. Yuli's dark eyes were wide with excitement behind his faceplate. "The patterns," he said, thrusting the tablet toward her. "They're not random. They're responding to us." The holographic display showed a time-lapse of the artifact's surface patterns over the past 24 hours. Sarah watched as the seemingly chaotic shifts resolved into a clear rhythm, perfectly matching the presence and absence of human observers. "Impossible," Crix chimed, his crystalline form vibrating with skepticism. "The artifact predates your species' evolution by hundreds of millennia. Any response to human presence would be purely coincidental." But Sarah wasn't listening. She'd noticed something in the pattern shifts, a familiarity that tickled the edges of her consciousness. "Yuli," she said slowly, "run the pattern through the linguistic database. Focus on pre-digital communication systems." "You can't be serious," Crix protested. "The predecessor artifacts have resisted translation by the finest minds in the galaxy for." "Got it!" Yuli exclaimed. Good lord, it's binary. Ancient binary, but the basic structure is unmistakable." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine that had nothing to do with the Martian cold. "It's been waiting," she whispered. "All this time, it's been waiting for someone who would recognize it for what it is." The sword's surface suddenly blazed with light, causing everyone to step back. Patterns cascaded across its surface like a waterfall of living code, and for a moment, Sarah could have sworn she heard something like laughter echoing in her mind. "Unauthorized energy spike," shouted one of the security officers. "Containment protocols." "No," Sarah said firmly, stepping forward. "Let it happen." The light from the sword coalesced into distinct shapes, forming what was unmistakably writing in the air before them. Not in any alien script, but in simple, elegant English. "Finally. Someone who speaks the language of logic." Crix's crystalline form vibrated with such intensity that small fragments broke off and fell to the Martian soil. "This is unprecedented. The Council must be notified immediately. All research must cease until—" "With respect, Ambassador," the floating text continued, "I wasn't talking to you." Sarah felt a smile spread across her face as she realized what they'd found wasn't just an artifact. It was a key, a test, and possibly the greatest discovery in human history. And somehow, impossibly, it had been waiting for humanity all along. The sword's glow pulsed once, twice, then settled into a steady rhythm that matched her heartbeat. More text appeared. "Shall we begin?" Around her, chaos erupted as various alien officials shouted orders and demands, but Sarah remained still, her eyes locked on the hovering sword. In that moment, she understood that everything humanity thought they knew about their place in the universe was about to change. The quarantine dome over the Martian excavation site hummed with tension. 3 days had passed since the sword's first communication, and the political situation had devolved into barely contained chaos. Sarah sat cross-legged on the floor of her makeshift lab, surrounded by holographic displays showing the endless stream of data flowing from the artifact. "The Galactic Security Council is threatening sanctions," Yuli reported, entering the lab with fresh coffee. Dark circles under his eyes suggested he'd been up all night again. "They're calling it a breach of the ancient technology protocols." Sarah accepted the coffee without looking away from her displays. "They're afraid," she said softly. "Not of the sword, of us." The artifact hung suspended in its containment field at the center of the lab, its surface rippling with patterns that seemed to dance in time with Sarah's brain waves. Every attempt by non-human researchers to approach it had resulted in complete shutdown, the sword becoming inert and unremarkable until they backed away. "Ambassador Crix is demanding we turn over all our findings," Yuli continued, slumping into a chair. "The Arcturus Science Division claims we're manipulating the readings." A quiet chime from one of the displays drew Sarah's attention. The sword was active again, its surface shimmering with what she'd come to recognize as anticipation. Text materialized in the air. "They seek what they cannot understand. The path is not for them." Sarah leaned forward, her fingers hovering over her neural interface pad. "Why us? Why humans?" The sword's response came in a cascade of images rather than words: ancient cave paintings, early writing systems, the first computer codes, the human genome. All patterns, all ways of encoding and transmitting information. "Because we recognize patterns," Sarah breathed, understanding dawning. "We've been pattern seekers since the beginning." "Correct. But patterns are only the beginning." The lab door hissed open, admitting Dr. Zenvier, the spindly, multi-limbed xenotechnologist who had arrived from the Sirius Collective 2 days ago. Unlike most alien scientists, Zenvier had shown genuine curiosity rather than dismissal. "Dr. Chen," Zenvier's translator hummed, "I believe I've identified something significant in the quantum resonance data." Sarah gestured to one of the empty chairs. "Show me." Zenvier's upper limbs worked in perfect coordination, manipulating the holographic displays. "The sword's energy signature matches no known technology, but it does match this." A new image appeared, a star chart showing mysterious energy pulses detected throughout the galaxy. "The beacon network," Sarah whispered. The mysterious signals had been detected decades ago, but no one had ever deciphered their purpose. The sword's surface erupted in a dazzling display of light. Recognition achieved. Phase 2 initiated. Suddenly, every piece of technology in the lab went dark. Sarah's neural interface fell silent. Even the containment field around the sword flickered and died. "Emergency protocols!" Yuli shouted, reaching for the alarm panel. But before he could touch it, the sword began to transform. Its metallic surface flowed like quicksilver, reshaping itself into something that defied description, a geometric pattern that seemed to exist in more dimensions than human eyes could process. At its center, a void opened, showing what appeared to be a map of the galaxy, but with connections and pathways that had never been visible before. "The network isn't just signals," Sarah realized, her voice filled with awe. "It's a map. A map of doorways," the sword completed. "Left by those who came before. Not for conquest. For understanding." Zenvia's multiple eyes widened in comprehension. The predecessor artifacts. They're not weapons or tools. They're keys, Sarah finished. Keys to doors we never knew existed. But why show us now? The sword's response was immediate, because you are ready to ask the right questions. Warning klaxons suddenly blared throughout the facility. Through the dome's transparent sections, Sarah could see multiple ships dropping out of hyperspace above Mars, ships bearing the markings of the Arcturus Defense Fleet. They're not here for answers, Yuli said grimly. They're here to take control. The sword's surface rippled with what Sarah could have sworn was determination. New text appeared. The time for observation is over. Now comes the test. Test? Sarah asked, but she already knew. The sword hadn't just been waiting for someone who could understand it. It had been waiting for someone who would use that understanding wisely. Above them, the Arcturus ships began their descent, and Sarah realized they were about to discover exactly what humanity had been chosen for, and whether they deserved that choice. The Arcturus ships loomed over the Martian facility like metallic predators, their hulls gleaming in the pale sunlight. Sarah stood before the transformed sword, her mind racing through possibilities as the facility's defense shields hummed to life. They're demanding immediate surrender of the artifact, Commander Rivera announced, striding into the lab. The career military officer looked oddly out of place among the research equipment. And they're backing it up with enough firepower to glass half the planet. That would be unwise, Dr. Zenvier observed, multiple limbs moving in agitation. The quantum resonance pattern suggests the artifact is now linked to something far larger. Any attempt to destroy it could have cascading effects. The sword turned geometric wonder pulsed with agreement, its galactic map spinning slowly in the air. New pathways lit up, showing connections between stars that shouldn't have been possible. Violence is not the answer, the artifact displayed. Nor is it the question. Sarah stepped closer to the shifting patterns. You're testing how we handle conflict, she realized. This isn't about power, it's about wisdom. The facility shook as the first warning shots struck the shields. Commander Rivera's communicator crackled with demands in multiple languages, all calling for immediate surrender of the illegal human research operation. I don't suppose, Yuli said dryly, we could explain that the ancient alien artifact has specifically requested human supervision? The sword's surface rippled with what might have been amusement, then projected a new message, show them the pattern of peace. Sarah's eyes widened as understanding struck. Commander, can you patch me into all communication channels? Including civilian frequencies? Rivera nodded grimly. They'll trace the broadcast immediately. That's exactly what we want, Sarah said, her fingers flying over the neural interface as she compiled data. Dr. Zenvier, I need everything you've discovered about the quantum resonance patterns. Yuli, get me the beacon network recordings. The sword's map expanded, showing more connections, more doorways between the stars. Sarah recognized what she was seeing now, not just a map, but a communication network spanning the galaxy. This is Dr. Sarah Chen, she broadcast on all frequencies, her voice steadied despite her racing heart. To all ships in Mars orbit and to the Galactic Security Council, we are transmitting data that proves this artifact is part of something far greater than weapons or power. She nodded to Yuli, who began streaming the compiled data. The patterns you're receiving match energy signatures detected throughout known space. They're not random. They're not weapons. They're pieces of the largest communication network ever created. The sword's surface blazed with approval as Sarah continued, the ancient civilization we've all been studying didn't leave us weapons, they left us a way to talk to each other. To understand each other. The artifacts respond to humans not because we're special, but because we're still learning how to communicate. We're still looking for patterns instead of assuming we know all the answers. The Arcturus ships hung motionless in the Martian sky as the data streamed to their computers. Sarah could almost imagine their crew's confusion as they processed what they were seeing. Well done, the sword displayed. Phase 3 initiated. Suddenly, every piece of technology in the facility, and presumably on the ships above, began receiving signals. The beacon network was active, and it was speaking in every known language simultaneously. By the void, Zenvier breathed, multiple eyes wide as data poured in. It's not just communication protocols. It's everything. Scientific knowledge, cultural records, philosophical debates spanning millions of years. A galaxy-wide library, Sarah whispered. Hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to ask the right questions instead of making demands. The facility's communication system crackled to life with a message from the Arcturus flagship, Dr. Chen, we are standing down. The Galactic Security Council requests an immediate conference to discuss peaceful cooperation. The sword's geometric pattern shifted once more, resolving into a shape that somehow managed to convey satisfaction. Its message was simple, the true test begins. I don't understand, Commander Rivera said, looking between the artifact and the now peaceful ships above. What test? Sarah smiled, watching as the first pieces of ancient knowledge began filtering through their systems. The test of what we'll do with understanding once we have it. Knowledge without wisdom is just data, and they left us both. Correct, the sword displayed. Now show them why pattern seekers were chosen. The facility hummed with activity as representatives from every ship began requesting permission to land. The sword's galactic map continued to spin, showing more connections, more doorways, more possibilities. They're not coming to take the artifact anymore, Yuli observed. They're coming to learn. That was the point all along, Sarah realized. Not to find someone worthy of power, but to find those willing to share understanding. The patterns were never about the sword, they were about us. All of us. Above Mars, more ships began arriving, not warships now, but research vessels and diplomatic cruisers. The galaxy was waking up to the realization that the greatest treasure the predecessors left behind wasn't a weapon or a tool, but a lesson about communication and cooperation. The Martian facility had transformed into an impromptu galactic conference center. 2 weeks after the standoff, representatives from over 300 species crowded the expanded dome, all drawn by the promise of ancient knowledge. Sarah watched from her lab's observation platform as dozens of alien scientists collaborated below, their differences forgotten in the pursuit of understanding. The quantum archives are still decoding, Yuli reported, bringing up a holographic display of their progress. We've barely scratched the surface of what the network contains. The sword turned key floated serenely in its new containment field, its geometric patterns now serving as an interface to the vast library of knowledge it had unveiled. But Sarah had noticed something troubling in the data they'd decoded so far. Dr. Chen, Dr. Zenvier approached, all 4 arms carrying different data tablets. We've identified an anomaly in the translation matrices. The knowledge isn't just being transmitted, it's being filtered. Sarah nodded grimly. I noticed. The sword isn't just giving us information, it's judging how we use what we learn. The geometric patterns shifted, confirming her suspicion, knowledge without understanding leads to devastation. A commotion near the main entrance drew their attention. Admiral Kos of the Arcturus fleet had arrived, his crystalline form radiating authority. Behind him came representatives from the Galactic Security Council, their varied forms suggesting a full tribunal was in session. Dr. Chen, the Admiral's translator, hummed. We've reviewed the first wave of decoded archives. The implications are concerning. Sarah straightened her spine, ready for the confrontation she'd been expecting. You found the warning about the void gates. The assembled aliens shifted uncomfortably. Among the first discoveries in the archives had been references to an ancient network of artificial wormholes, technology that could revolutionize interstellar travel. But the data came with explicit warnings about their use. The power requirements alone could drain entire star systems, one of the council members noted. But the potential benefits. Some doors remain closed for a reason, the sword displayed, its patterns turning dark and foreboding. That's what happened to them, isn't it? Sarah asked quietly. The predecessors. They built the gates, and something came through. Something they weren't ready for. The sword's response was chilling. The void between universes holds patterns you are not yet prepared to comprehend. Admiral Kosa's crystalline form vibrated with concern. Then why show us this knowledge at all? Why risk us repeating their mistakes? Because, Dr. Zenvier interjected, multiple eyes wide with realization, we need to understand the price of hubris before we can avoid paying it. The sword pulsed with approval, projecting a new series of images, civilizations rising and falling, species reaching for power they couldn't control, and finally, a glimpse of something vast and dark moving between the stars. They didn't vanish, Sarah breathed. They sacrificed themselves to close the gates. To protect whatever came after them. Correct, the sword confirmed. And now you must decide. Decide what? Admiral Coast demanded. Whether we're wise enough to learn from their mistakes, Yuli answered softly. Whether we can handle knowledge without being consumed by it. The sword's patterns began shifting more rapidly, displaying information about the void gates, not just their power requirements and technical specifications, but the philosophical debates that had preceded their creation, the warnings that had been ignored, the price that had been paid. It's not just a test of our wisdom, Sarah realized. It's a test of our restraint. Of our ability to know something is possible and choose not to do it. The council members conferred quietly, their various appendages and sensory organs conveying deep concern. Finally, their speaker stepped forward. The council proposes a moratorium on any research into the void gate technology. That's not enough, Sarah countered, her voice firm. Knowledge like this, it needs guardians. People dedicated to understanding not just how to use it, but when not to. The sword's patterns erupted in a dazzling display. The pattern seekers understand. Phase 4 initiated. Suddenly, the galactic map reappeared, but now it showed something new, hidden facilities scattered throughout the galaxy, each containing pieces of the predecessor's legacy. Not weapons or gates, but libraries, laboratories, and something else, something that pulsed with the same energy as the sword. They left us more than knowledge, Sarah said, understanding dawning. They left us a choice. We can pursue power and risk everything, or we can become what they couldn't, guardians of wisdom instead of seekers of dominance. Admiral Coase stepped forward, his crystalline form reflecting the sword's light. And if we choose wrongly? The sword's answer was immediate, then the pattern begins again, and another will be chosen. In that moment, Sarah understood the true weight of their discovery. It wasn't just about accessing ancient knowledge or unlocking cosmic secrets. It was about proving that intelligence could evolve beyond the hunger for power, that wisdom could triumph over ambition. 1 year after the sword's revelation, the Martian facility had evolved into something its original architects could never have imagined. The dome now housed the first Galactic Institute of Pattern Studies, where beings from across the cosmos came to learn not just what the predecessors knew, but how to use that knowledge wisely. Sarah stood in the central chamber, watching the sword's geometric patterns dance across the ceiling. The artifact had become more than a key or a test, it was now a teacher, sharing its wisdom with those who proved ready to receive it. The last of the hidden facilities has been located, Yuli announced, entering the chamber with Dr. Zenvier. The Sirius Collective found it orbiting a dying star. Just like the others, it was waiting for the right questions to be asked. The sword's patterns shifted, displaying a completed map of all 13 facilities. Each one contained a different aspect of the predecessor's legacy, science, philosophy, art, and mysteries that defied classification. But none contained what many species still secretly hoped to find, weapons or tools of conquest. Ready for the final truth, the sword displayed. Sarah took a deep breath. "We've been ready for a while, haven't we? That's why you chose us." The geometric patterns expanded, filling the chamber with a display more vivid than any they'd seen before. It showed the predecessors not as the godlike beings of legend, but as something far more profound, creatures who had learned the hardest lesson any civilization could face. They weren't always wise, Sarah narrated, understanding flowing through her as the sword shared its memories. They were like us once. Hungry for power, for knowledge, for control. Until they opened the void gates, Yuli added softly. The sword's display shifted, showing the catastrophic moment when the predecessors realized their mistake. The gates had worked perfectly, too perfectly. They had opened doorways not just across space, but across dimensions, attracting the attention of beings that defied comprehension. "What is your conclusion?" the sword asked. Admiral Kos, who had become a surprising ally over the past year, stepped forward. His crystalline form had grown additional facets from prolonged exposure to the sword's energy. They could have fought. Could have used their technology to wage war across realities. But they chose something harder, Dr. Zenvier observed, multiple eyes gleaming with understanding. They chose to protect rather than destroy. The sword's patterns swirled in approval. The hardest victory is the one over oneself. Sarah watched as the display showed the predecessor's final act, not a desperate last stand, but a deliberate choice to seal the gates, hide their knowledge, and create a system to find worthy successors. Not successors to their power, but to their wisdom. That's why the sword responded to humans, she realized. Not because we're special or superior, but because we're still young enough to learn from others' mistakes. Still capable of choosing a different path. "The pattern completes," the sword announced. Final phase initiated. The chamber filled with light as the sword began its final transformation. The geometric patterns flowed like liquid starlight, reshaping themselves into something that seemed to exist in all dimensions at once. When the light faded, what remained was not a weapon or a key, but a mirror, one that showed not reflections, but possibilities. "Oh," Sarah breathed, understanding at last. It was never about the sword at all. It was about showing us who we could become. In the mirror's surface, they saw civilizations learning to grow without destroying, to advance without conquering, to know without overwhelming. They saw species working together not because they had to, but because they chose to. They saw wisdom spreading like starlight across the galaxy. Guardians, the mirror displayed, its surface rippling with possibility. Not of power, but of potential. Admiral Kos stepped forward, his crystalline form reflecting infinite possibilities. "And if we fail? If we give in to the temptation of power?" The mirror's response was both gentle and firm, "Then others will rise. The pattern continues until it is complete." Sarah placed her hand on the mirror's surface, feeling not cold metal but the warm pulse of possibility. "We won't fail," she said, and for the first time, she truly believed it. "Because we're not doing this alone." The mirror's final message spread across its surface like a dawn breaking over a new world. "The test ends. The journey begins. Show us what you will become." Around them, the chamber hummed with energy as representatives from every known species gathered to witness the moment. The sword-turned mirror hung suspended in its field, no longer a mystery to be solved but a promise to be fulfilled. In that moment, Sarah understood that this wasn't an ending at all. It was a beginning, not just for humanity, but for all species who were ready to learn that the greatest power wasn't in domination or control, but in the wisdom to choose a better path. The mirror pulsed one last time, its surface showing not what was or what had been, but what could be, a galaxy united not by force or fear, but by the shared pursuit of understanding. A future that they would all build together, one pattern at a time.